It is so great that you're here this morning with us. My name is Molly. I'm the Adult Programs Manager at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and we're really pleased that you had some time this morning to join us with our Mornings with O'Keeffe virtual lecture seminar that we offer once a month. And so thank you for being here. I'd like to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing injustices of settler colonialism. I'd also like to extend a thank you to our members and donors because without your support, we wouldn't be able to have events like this. So if you're not a member and you're interested in learning more about what kind of benefits you get with a membership with the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, you can visit us at gokm.org/membership to learn more. Throughout this talk, please place your questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your your device. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. For the duration of the lecture, the chat has been disabled. Please note that following today's talk, a recording will be made available on the O'Keeffe Museum's website in about a week's time. Both English and Spanish captions will be available. So having said all that, I'm so excited to move on to the program today. Something that's really wonderful about a virtual program like this is, in addition to being able to share what the O'Keeffe Museum is up to with a wide audience, we're able to connect with scholars and curators and institutions and artists over great distances to learn what other contributions are being made to O'Keeffe scholarship and the other creative interpretations of O'Keeffe's life and legacy are being expanded through the work of other organizations and institutions. So today is no different because we are joined by three members of the curatorial team from the Mattituck Museum, which is located in Waterbury, Connecticut. And today you will hear from Kefi Feldman, who is the chief curator at that institution, Becca Low-Presti, the assistant curator, and Julie Francois, the Art Bridges Fellow, as a part of the curatorial team. And they're going to share with you about two really exciting projects that revolve around O'Keeffe that are happening at that institution. And without any further delay, I will go ahead and pass things over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Molly, so much for that introduction and for having us here with you today. As she mentioned, I'm Kefi Feldman. I'm the chief curator at the Mattituck Museum. And with me again are Becca Low-Presti, our assistant curator, and Julie Francois, our Art Bridges Fellow. We're going to be passing the floor back and forth, so you'll have an opportunity to hear from all of us. But I just want to say we are so thrilled to share with you these two major initiatives related to Georgia O'Keeffe. Just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to lay out what we're going to discuss during this presentation. Since many of you may not be familiar with the Mattituck Museum yet, we'll first introduce you to our institution and to tell you a little bit about who we are. Next, we'll introduce the Art Bridges Foundation and their partner loan network that facilitated the O'Keeffe paintings that were the catalyst for these initiatives. Next, we'll discuss O'Keeffe in Conversation, the year-long project that put O'Keeffe's work in dialogue with the Mattituck's collection. Then we'll talk about the current exhibition, Modern Women, Georgia O'Keeffe and Kay Sage, that is a larger yet more focused conversation between O'Keeffe and our collection. And finally, we will make sure to leave time for your questions. With so much to get through in the next hour, let us jump right in. So first, I'll introduce you to the Mattituck Museum, our mission, our collection, and the types of exhibition projects we present. The Mattituck Museum is located in Waterbury, Connecticut, between the cities of Hartford and Danbury. So if you were ever driving along I-84 in this neck of the woods, please stop in and say hello to us. We are a regional museum that has a dual mission of collecting and presenting both art and history. With our history collection, we focus on the history of Waterbury and the Naugatuck Valley, and we collect both material culture and archival material. And the Mattituck also collects and displays American art as very broadly defined. With such a wide-ranging mission, our collection is similarly diverse. The collection contains American fine art and material culture that spans from the 17th century to the present. Our collection contains over 10,000 objects in a variety of media, and this collection is largely managed by Wayne Eldred, our collections manager. You see the image on the right is of our collection gallery. We are also home to a gallery that displays some of the over 20,000 buttons in our collection, and that's the image that you see on the left. And we also have an extensive library and archive that is managed by Dr. Francis Martin. And as the rest of the curatorial department, I think Wayne and Francis definitely deserve a shout out, even if they aren't with us here today. We also present a robust exhibition schedule of an average of 15 exhibitions annually in 4 changing gallery spaces. We offer a combination of original, internally curated thematic exhibitions like Stitching the Revolution, Quilts as Agents of Change. This, dare I say, award-winning exhibition looked at how artists and craftspeople have long used the medium to express political position, advocate for equal rights, and speak truth to power, particularly women and marginalized communities who often lack access to more official channels. We also present internally curated single artist solo exhibitions like Federico Uribe Menagerie, a show that focused on the Colombian-born, Miami-based artist's use of unexpected materials to create sculptures of animals and the landscapes they inhabit. And also externally organized traveling shows like Gordon Parks' Homeward to the Prairie I Come, which incidentally is traveled by Art Bridges, who you'll learn about in just a few minutes. And this amazing show is on view until March 30th. So again, if you're in our area and you haven't seen it yet, I would really strongly recommend coming by. With our exhibition program as a whole, we aim to tell stories that feel relevant to and reflective of our diverse audiences. We focus on showing artwork from a range of makers and a variety of media to reflect the richness and diversity of American art. Now that you know a little bit about who we are and what we're about, I'm going to turn the floor over to Julie, who will introduce you to our relationship with the Art Bridges Foundation and their Partner Loan Network initiative.
Thank you, Kathy. The Art Bridges Partner Loan Network is an initiative dedicated to bringing American art out of museum vaults and presenting it in communities across the United States. Art Bridges works closely with their partners in order to provide various levels of financial support to offset direct costs relating to crating, shipping, installation, and loans. They also provide funding for programming and audience engagement. With this additional funding and learning engagement, we are able to further activate these works and engage our communities through events and programming. For example, we'll be hosting a one-woman theater performance titled O'Keeffe coming this May. Mattituck was one of the few institutions actually chosen to pilot the Partner Loan Network back in 2022. We are proud to have been long-term partners with Art Bridges, working with them since 2017. Through the generous support of the Art Bridges Foundation, the Mattituck Museum is honored to showcase 3 Georgia O'Keeffe paintings on loan for a year from the Cleveland Museum of Art. To take a closer look, the works that we have on loan are Georgia O'Keeffe's It Was Yellow and Pink 2, Dead Tree with Pink Hill, and Sunflower, New Mexico #1. These paintings chronicle key aspects of O'Keeffe's art, her iconic close-up approach in depicting flowers, her love of New Mexico's landscape, and her interest in abstraction. These works are currently on view in our exhibition titled Modern Woman, Georgia O'Keeffe and Kay Sage, curated by our very own Dr. Kathy Feldman. We'll hear a little bit more about this exhibition a little later on in our presentation, but for context, the exhibition uniquely showcases the work of both Kay Sage and Georgia O'Keeffe in conversation with one another as pioneering women artists in their respective fields during the 20th century. In addition to being featured in our current exhibition, as part of our year-long programming to exhibit these works, they will be paired with rotating pieces from our art and history collection. These smaller O'Keeffe in conversations unite the Mattituck Museum's collection with Georgia O'Keeffe's life and work through 3 common themes. Our O'Keeffe in Conversation exhibitions are spotlight shows that celebrate the year-long loan of the 3 Georgia O'Keeffes. These smaller O'Keeffe in Conversation shows are curated by each one of us presenting here today and highlight different themes of O'Keeffe's works and connects her with our very own collection at the Mattituck. Conversation number 1 is titled Flowers and Landscapes and was curated by Dr. Keffy Feldman. Conversation number 2 is titled Art of the Southwest, curated by Assistant Curator Becca Lopresti. And finally, our third and final O'Keeffe in conversation will be curated by myself and is titled Woman in Abstraction. I will now be passing the floor to Becca Lopresti.
Thank you so much, Julie. So I'm going to be talking about our first 2 conversations, and I'm going to begin with flowers and landscapes. And to start, I do want to share a quote that was written about Georgia O'Keeffe in 1930 by a cultural critic named Samuel Coutts. Coutts said, quote, "O'Keeffe was being a woman and only secondarily an artist," end quote. So Coutts actually was a fan of O'Keeffe's work, but like a lot of other critics that she experienced during her life, people who praised her work often did so while deriding her gender as an identity as a woman artist. And so for this first conversation, we wanted to highlight artists in our collection who were still pushing artistic and social boundaries, but were doing so while occupying marginalized spaces in society. So artists who were really navigating their own identity through their artwork, just as O'Keeffe did. And so we also wanted to focus on artists who shared similar subject matter to O'Keeffe. And the artists that we decided to feature from left to right are Jane Peterson's Tiger Lilies, Charles Ethan Porter's Peonies, Edward Gay's Lake George Inlet, Spring Landscape, and Elizabeth Kirk's Landscape with Mountains. I'm going to first introduce you to Jane Peterson, who we have on the left. So Peterson was an American artist working at the end of the 19th century through the middle of the 20th century. And she was someone who traveled extensively and became quite well known for and received a lot of acclaim for incorporating these sort of international artistic styles into her work. So specifically Fauvism, Impressionism, and Expressionism, which she used to make these really dynamic scenes. She then married a richer and wealthier husband who basically said to her that your scenes of Europe aren't very ladylike, and I prefer if you turn to painting flowers, which he thought were more socially acceptable for a woman of her status. And Peterson did so, but she still continued to maintain this sort of genre-defying and interdisciplinary approach to art, despite painting what were seen as more classically feminine subject matter. And that's really evident here in Tiger Lilies. We can see here this sort of abrupt cropping. The flower stem is cut off at the bottom, and we can also see that the leaves and petals of the flower are extending beyond the canvas. So despite the fact that she was sort of relinquishing some of her more adventurous topics, she was still maintaining these sort of groundbreaking and genre-defying approaches to floral subjects. The second artist that we wanted to highlight here for flowers is someone who has a connection to Connecticut, which is really exciting. Charles Ethan Porter, who we're seeing on the right, was a Black artist who was the first Black man ever to attend the prestigious National Academy of Design in New York City, and he did so only 4 years after the Civil War ended. He then went on to become the first professional Black still life painter of any gender. And a lot of his works consist of these really gorgeously composed still lifes of flowers and vases, and then a lot of household objects. And what makes Peonies unique is we're seeing a sort of close-up look of these flowers instead of looking at them inside of a vase. And one of the reasons why I personally love this painting so much is that we're following the sort of diagonal movement of blooming flowers. And so with his composition, we can see he starts in the lower left-hand corner and really pushes the viewer's eye to the top right corner, capturing the movement of flowers as they're actively blooming. In all 3 of these paintings, we can see the artists are really relying on single tone backgrounds and highly detailed examinations of the flowers that allow us to appreciate the sort of finer details of these floral subjects and give us a new way to look at them. We also wanted to highlight landscape artists from our collection. So starting with Edward Gay, who we're seeing on the far left, Gay was actually an Irish immigrant who came to the United States to escape the Great Famine. And he arrived in the United States at a time where anti-Irish discrimination was really sort of at its all-time high. So Gay, as a young child, and his family would not have been considered sort of equal members of society. But despite this, Gay found success painting in the style of the Hudson River School, which we can see here in this painting of Lake George, the sort of light hitting the top left corner of the mountain, this very sublime, very tranquil nature scene. And so Gay was navigating his own sense of identity and his newfound citizenship in America by painting very explicitly American scenes and in explicitly American style. And then finally, on the far right, we have Elizabeth Kirk, another artist who has not only a Connecticut connection, but a Waterbury connection. So Elizabeth Kirk was a painter and educator who at the time was the president of the Waterbury Art School, which was a school that was known for teaching students sort of pioneering art movements. They would bring in teachers from New York City and from the nearby Yale School of Fine Arts. And one of the movements that was taught to students was Precisionism, which we know O'Keeffe also engaged with while she was in New York City. Precisionism at the time was really a male-dominated art movement with artists focusing on sort of harsh lines, broad swatches of color, and really capturing sort of an industrial aesthetic. And Kirk did that, but she also put her own spin on things, which is what we're seeing in this painting on the right. So she's still really focusing on line, again, clear color palettes. There's no signs of people in these paintings, but she's moving the landscape to be more rural, maybe a New England landscape, but engaging more with the natural environment. So Elizabeth Kirk was putting her own spin on what was a very male-dominated movement. And so with this first O'Keeffe in Conversation, we were able to introduce our audiences to the 3 gorgeous O'Keeffe paintings that we had on loan, but also put them in conversation with artists from our collection. Moving to the second conversation, this was the one that I curated. It's called Art of the Southwest, and I wanted to do this theme for 2 reasons. First of all, as we know, the Southwest was so integral to O'Keeffe's life and identity, and the works that we have are influenced by the Southwest. But the Southwest feels really far away from Waterbury, Connecticut. This conversation was up in the middle of winter, which really made it feel like such a distant place. And it's also a place that isn't easily accessible to a lot of our audiences, myself included. I've never been there. And so I wanted to kind of create a snapshot of the Southwest as a region in our museum in central Connecticut. The other reason why is that O'Keeffe, again, is known for depicting the Southwest, but she depicted the Southwest in a way that was very absent of people, despite the fact that the Southwest has always been an incredibly vibrant region that has been home to different political, cultural, social groups, and that the boundaries of the Southwest are constantly changing. And so taking this all into account, I wanted to show how the Southwest has been and continues to be an inspiration for generations of artists from a variety of backgrounds who are really engaging with the fact that the region has been in flux. So from left to right, we have George Biddle's Autumn in Tortilla Flat, Dewey Tafoya's Los Tenis de Cuauhtemoc, Frank Romero's Untitled, and then finally on the far right, Elizabeth Catlett's Singing Head. To begin with Dewey Tafoya, Tafoya is a contemporary printmaker based in Los Angeles, and he draws on 700 plus years of history, as well as his own identity as a Chicano printmaker. And so in this print that we see here, he's rethinking the collapse of the Aztec Empire at the hands of Cortez, the colonizer. And he's doing this by sort of reinterpreting Cortez sneakers. These were sneakers that Tafoya saw growing up that are ironically called after a colonizer. And what you're going to notice on these sneakers is he's replaced the iconic Nike swoosh with a protective Aztec symbol as a way of sort of retroactively offering protection to Cuauhtemoc, who was the final leader of the Aztec Empire. In Tafoya's work, he pulls from American, Indigenous, and Mexican symbols, and the Southwest is home to many such communities whose cultural ties transcend contemporary political borders. I also wanted to pull this piece because he shares similar color palettes with O'Keeffe, which I think really spoke to giving a snapshot of the region at large. On the right, we have Frank Romero's Untitled. His piece and It Was Yellow and Pink by O'Keeffe might not seem to be in conversation with each other, but they're both actually abstracted versions of an aerial perspective of the landscape. So Romero is presenting an abstracted version of the infamous Los Angeles freeway, specifically a cloverleaf interchange. And whereas O'Keeffe's abstraction presents a sort of landscape, again, untouched by people, Romero is really speaking to the mundane beauty of the built environment. However, his artwork also comments on the freeway as a very divisive piece of infrastructure that has historically and systemically separated and siloed Black and Brown communities. So again, these 2 artists are engaging with sort of similar themes of the Southwest, but really putting the people first. Finally, we have Biddle and Catlett. George Biddle was actually painting and working at the same time as Georgia O'Keeffe, and he made this painting based on a book by John Steinbeck, probably famous for Of Mice and Men and Grapes of Wrath. But Steinbeck's first sort of bestseller was a 1935 novel called Tortilla Flat that focused on a small community of Mexican, Indigenous, and Spanish paisanos living in the Southwest. And Biddle paints a scene and sort of interprets that. I wanted to include him because Biddle and Steinbeck and O'Keeffe were people who really shaped how the rest of the United States came to perceive and understand and conceive of the Southwest as a region. So despite the fact that Biddle, Steinbeck, and O'Keeffe were not part of really any of the communities that they were representing, they nonetheless shaped the cultural concept of such people. And then finally, we have Elizabeth Catlett's Singing Head. So Catlett, like O'Keeffe, was someone who had experienced a move, and that had a profound impact on her life and art. So whereas O'Keeffe relocated to New Mexico and really sort of shifted the way that she was interpreting and painting the world, Catlett moved and immigrated to Mexico and began to incorporate Mexican identity in her life, art, and advocacy. This sculpture, Singing Head, is an interpretation of a poem by American poet Margaret Walker called For My People, which includes a stanza about slave songs and their importance and impact on the Black diaspora. And Catlett actually carved this head using stone from Taxco, Mexico. So what we're seeing is she's using Mexican materials, like the literal Mexican environment, to interpret themes distinct to Black American identity. And she's pulling these materials from an environment that many people and communities in the present day Southwest continue to identify with. So again, bringing the literal environment into the conversation. And so with O'Keeffe in conversation number 2, we were able to get a snapshot of the Southwest region while also highlighting the diverse people who have called and still call this place home. I'm now going to turn the floor back to Julie, who's going to introduce you to the third O'Keeffe in conversation.
Thank you, Becca. O'Keeffe in conversation number 3, titled Women in Abstraction, will be on view this summer, and it will explore the innovative ways in which women have embraced abstraction to represent connections to the natural world and memory. These works featured in this showcase will showcase a diverse range of photographic, print-based techniques, and mixed media pieces that each artist is using to create their very own distinct visual language, navigating the major themes of memory and nature. From experimental darkroom practices to vivid abstracted portrayals of landscape, these women challenge traditional boundaries of representation, creating compelling narratives through abstraction. By putting these abstract women artists in conversation with each other and O'Keeffe, we can examine the ways in which women are showcasing us how, rather than what they saw, through an abstracted lens in their unique mediums. Like O'Keeffe, we are seeing women connect to the natural world and translate their ideas of memory through art. Georgia O'Keeffe had the remarkable ability to show us the beauty in nature's unexpected places. As we see in her Dead Tree with Pink Hill painting, her focus on the landscape in the American Southwest is rooted in her appreciation of the regional beauty, and through her lively brushstrokes and compositions, she was able to focus our attention to the sights around her. All 3 of the women artists here from the Manatee collection, Patricia Gherkin, Cheryl Weisbach, and Deborah Claffey, are part of the Elemental Artists Collective, a group of women who create abstract art that explores environmental themes. Their work in the encaustic medium, or beeswax mixed with colored pigments, and often incorporate their natural materials like leaves, sea glass, and dust to further contribute to some compelling textures and colors. Their work as a collective encourages us to reflect on current environmental concerns, from the acidification of the world's oceans to the loss of plant and animal species. Their work allows us to reimagine a future of ecological sustainability. O'Keeffe and these artists call our attention to the life and sustainability of the natural world around us while simultaneously embracing the art of abstraction, allowing for texture and color to take up space on their canvas. Georgia O'Keeffe's It Was Yellow and Pink was inspired by the aerial views she saw while flying long distances in propeller planes in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Recalling the vistas viewed through the airplane window, she described seeing such incredible colors that you could actually believe in your dreams. Her painting of a river reflects her actual observations, while providing us with a striking abstract design through creative use of color, scale, and perspective. With a photography background myself, I found it interesting to find artists in the Mata collection who were working on a lens-based medium and abstracting what they could capture. With that in mind, we have local Connecticut-based artist Ellen Carey in her photogenic drawing from her Struck by Light series. Struck by Light is a name of her umbrella concept and artistic practice, referring to artworks made under an antiquated method called the photogram. In the darkroom, Carey experiments with exposure and light to create ethereal, abstract works that are all at once fleeting and permanent. Her exploration of abstraction highlights both the materiality of photography and the emotional resonance of light as a medium. Similarly to O'Keeffe, Carey is playing with scale and memory through light and photography, documenting transient moments of light, creating abstract works of light and motion. Additionally, while famously known for her candid and intimate portraits of people, we have Nan Goldin's Lamb Ears that highlights the artist's foray into abstraction through her exploration of the natural world. Shifting away from her typical human subjects, Goldin photographs focus closely on the textures, shapes, and sensory qualities of plants. Like O'Keeffe, Goldin takes subjects from the natural world and plays with scale, zooming in so that it is simultaneously recognizable and strange. Her piece reveals the woolly textures, curved forms, and delicate fur-like surface of flora, inviting us to experience nature in a way that feels tactile and emotional. Her images speak to a deeper connection to the earth and an abstraction that is rooted in the organic world. She is in direct dialogue with O'Keeffe's It Was Yellow and Pink Too, playing with scale in the natural world to tell us how rather than what she saw. I'll now be passing the floor back to Kathy Feldman, who will discuss a little bit more about Modern Woman.
Thank you so much, Julie. So yes, now we will turn the conversation to Modern Women, Georgia O'Keeffe and Kay Sage, an exhibition that's currently on view at the Mattituck Museum until June 8th. This exhibition looks at the work of these two pioneering female artists in conversation with each other for the first time. Both artists came of age and artistic maturity in the early 20th century, which was a time of social and political upheaval and rapid technological change. While insofar as I've been able to determine, the two never met, they both worked at the forefront of modernist movements, abstraction and surrealism, respectively. And they both used their artwork to respond to developments in global politics, art history, and their own lives. So despite very different personal aesthetics, both O'Keeffe and Sage used their art to communicate deeper truths about themselves and the world they lived in. One of the conceits of this pairing is to raise the profile of Kay Sage, who was a relatively well-known surrealist artist in her lifetime, but whose legacy has since suffered. I'm going to give you a quick summary of her life and career in case you're not familiar with her, so you can appreciate her story and also how her work speaks to that of O'Keeffe. So Sage was born in 1898 in upstate New York. Her early childhood was marked by her parents' divorce, and subsequently she spent the better part of her formative years living in Europe with her mother. She showed an aptitude for art at an early age, and she had formal artistic training both in the United States and in Europe, where she was trained in an academic realist style, and that's exemplified by the portrait you see in the upper left called Girl in Black Dress. You can see it's a very straightforward realist portrait. When she married an Italian prince in 1925, she largely abandoned her art due to the demands of Italian high society. But nearly 10 years into her marriage and increasingly despairing, Sage turned back to her artwork, and eventually she also divorced her husband. It was at this time that she also began to experiment with more expressive aesthetics, perhaps as a way to process her own fraught emotional life. And we see an example of work during this period in the upper right. It's a piece called Untitled or Twisted Tree. And we can see that the twisted form of this tree may also be indicative of her inner turmoil. In 1937, she moved from Italy to Paris, where she encountered surrealism for the first time. And while in Paris, she became part of André Breton's surrealist crew, among whom was her future husband, Yves Tanguy. When World War broke out in the fall of 1939, Sage escaped Europe and sailed back to her native New York, and Tanguy, who's a French national, came to meet her shortly thereafter. They married in 1940, and in 1941, they relocated to Woodbury, Connecticut, which is not very far from the Mattituck Museum. The war and its resulting dislocation had a major impact on Sage's mature surrealist style, which is characterized by desolate landscapes that are populated with architectonic forms and inanimate objects, an example of which is the image on the lower left. It's called Shivering Mountain. And with the isolated forms and the long shadows, we really do get a sense of this isolated disorientation. Like other surrealist artists, Sage was responding to developments in psychology, and she was really particularly concerned with expressing archetypal human truths and also elements of her own subconscious. So living happily in Woodbury, Connecticut, Sage and Tanguy worked side by side in their home studio until he died very suddenly in 1955. Absolutely devastated by this loss, Sage's mental and emotional health rapidly declined, and cataracts impacted her ability to paint. So she then turned to mixed media constructions, often that communicated her deep despair. And we see an example of this on the lower right, a piece called Spontaneous Confusion, the title of which sort of evokes spontaneous combustion, perhaps a reference to how her life totally blew up with the death of her husband, and also the mess of wires gives us a sense of her real frustrated futility. Ultimately, for Sage, it was her despair that won out, and she died by suicide in 1963 after a few unsuccessful attempts. And it was in the final years of her life that she really worked tirelessly to secure Tanguy's legacy. And as a result of this, and also just the patriarchy in general, her own legacy has really suffered. So now that you're up to speed on who Kay Sage is, I'd like to share with you a little bit about the genesis of this project, because it helps explain why the Mattituck Museum is uniquely suited to present such an exhibition. With the O'Keeffe paintings on loan for a year, I knew I wanted to do a larger special exhibition, but I wasn't exactly sure how to do it. And you're looking at some images of the exhibition as fully conceived now. As we all know, Georgia O'Keeffe has been the subject of exhibitions and scholarship for over a century, and I wanted to present an original project that was going to add to the discussion of O'Keeffe and her work in a meaningful way. And that's when I realized that the Mattituck has an incredible asset, and there was actually an amazing opportunity to do something new. The Mattituck Museum happens to be home to Sage's estate. Sage actually served on the Mattituck's exhibition committee, and her lawyer also had a relationship with the museum. So when she died in 1963, the remains of her estate, which included paintings, works on paper, objects, ephemera, and personal papers, were all donated to the museum. You see the image on the left is a case in the exhibition that contains a range of the ephemera that we have in the collection, from her anatomy notebook to a Christmas card to her friend Alexandra Darrow, who actually took the photograph that you also see in the picture. And this case was expertly curated by Becca Lopresti. Shout out to Becca. And on the right-hand side, you see an image of Sage and Tanguy playing pool in their Woodbury home. And below that is the small tile that Sage painted for Tanguy on the occasion of their wedding. With all of this material related to Sage, it seemed like a perfect opportunity to look at her work in conversation with O'Keeffe's, which provided a new way of thinking about both of these artists, while also being a story that the Mattituck Museum is uniquely situated to tell. So this exhibition has become a sort of fourth conversation in the larger series. It felt important to include a timeline in the exhibition to allow for close comparison between their two lives within a broader context. So that's the image you see on the left, and on the right you see some images in the exhibition where the artwork is displayed in conversation. And I'd also like to give Julie a shout out for the research she did on this timeline. Indeed, when comparing the life and careers of these two artists, there are a surprising number of similarities, and I'm going to list just a few. So they were both born at the end of the 19th century, about 10 years apart. They both had academic training in art early in their careers. They were both influenced by a teacher who really fundamentally changed how they thought about their artistic practice. That was Arthur Wesley Dow for O'Keeffe and Onorato Carlandi for Sage. They both married famous male artists. O'Keeffe married Arthur Stieglitz and Sage married Yves Tanguy. Travel really deeply informed their artistic sensibilities. The Southwest was inspirational for O'Keeffe and Europe for Sage. Each artist developed her own unique and readily recognizable aesthetic. Both received critical acclaim in their lifetimes, though, as we know, O'Keeffe saw much greater success than did Sage, which continues to have repercussions today. Both artists also suffered from the loss of vision later in their careers, which impacted the types of artwork they produced. And significantly, both artists rejected human figures, preferring instead objects and landscapes to communicate a deeper truth about the world and their experience of it. This unique opportunity to look at their life and work side by side gave me a deeper appreciation for each of their experiences and also the challenges of being a woman artist, really ever, and especially in the early 20th century. In the next few slides, we're going to explore some of these connections as they're manifested in their work. So first, we'll look at early paintings of both artists. Then we'll look at their treatment of landscapes. And lastly, how they accounted for and responded to their gender. The exhibition contains early work by both artists, which was a great opportunity to see how their style matured over time. On the left, we have O'Keeffe's Dead Rabbit and Copper Pot that she painted in 1908 when she was studying at the Art Students League of New York. And on the right, we have Landscape with Poplar that Sage painted when she was studying art in Rome and was also a part of the Bohemian landscape painting group I 25 della Campagna Romana, or the 25 of the Roman countryside. Both artists made these paintings when they were students in their 20s, and both also seem to be straightforward, realist representations of recognizable subjects in traditional genres. We have still life on the left and landscape painting on the right. But both of these works also contain inklings of compositional and stylistic elements that we see in their later mature styles. So if we look at the left, the work on the left, although about this painting, O'Keeffe said, "Who wants to spend the rest of their life painting rabbits and copper bowls?" This work actually won the William Merritt Chase Award for still life at the Art Students League of New York. And if we look at the composition, here O'Keeffe is playing with space and perspective. You see her pushing the figures to the top of the canvas and leaving a lot of negative space in the lower half. And this is actually a compositional preference that she carries into her mature practice, and in fact, one that we will see on the very next slide. The copper pot is rendered with tight brushstrokes, but she uses much looser, impressionistic brushwork for the rabbit. And this contrast really presages her interest in conveying her experience of a thing more than a realistic and straightforward depiction of it. If we look at Landscape with Poplar on the right, this work really expresses Carlandi's teaching as he advocated for putting an element in the extreme foreground of a work to convey a sense of depth and distance. And the poplar tree here in the lower left is surrounded by an expanse of countryside with a low horizon. And many of Sage's later paintings similarly employ a low horizon with the sky as a dominant motif. And indeed, we'll see that in the next slide. So even in their early work, we can see both artists were experimenting with elements that would become part of their signature artistic styles, which really demonstrates that artistic voice is developed slowly and over time. O'Keeffe and Sage also both painted landscapes prolifically, though to very different ends. The work on the left is called New Mexican Landscape, and it depicts the sandy hills near Alcalde, which is a village about 40 miles from Taos, New Mexico. And this was painted during her second trip to the Southwest in 1930. O'Keeffe wrote really extensively about her experience of the Southwest, and quotes like, "The mountain calls one, and the desert, and the sagebrush. The country seems to call one in a way that one has to answer it." And another quote, "I am West again, and it is as fine as I remembered it, maybe finer. For me, it is the only place." Both of these quotes really convey the deep connection she felt to the landscape. And if we look at the composition, the peak of the hill is really pushing towards the top of the canvas. And this conceit gives us a sense of the awe and majesty of the landscape. And also her use of soft colors and sort of watery brushstrokes convey a sense of real grounding and emotional ease. And with this work, O'Keeffe is trying to convey her experience of being in a place and also the really positive and emotional impact that it had on her. In contrast, on the right, we have a work from Sage called The Instant, which was painted in her mature surrealist style at the height of her career in 1949. Here we see a mountain in a desolate landscape that's populated with angular ruins. With respect to the composition, we see here again objects in the extreme foreground to create that sense of distance and depth, and also the low horizon with the sky as the dominant motif. About mountains as a symbol, Sage said that they can represent almost anything, a human being, life, the world, really any fundamental thing. So for her, the mountain had a real flexible symbolism. And about this particular work, she said that it's a sort of showing what's inside, things half mechanical, half alive. And with this work, Sage is really trying to convey her internal experience of being in the world. So while O'Keeffe's landscapes are about capturing the beauty and majesty of the Southwest and communicating how this landscape made her feel, Sage used the landscape as a metaphor for expressing her complicated inner life. O'Keeffe once said, "Men put me down as the best woman painter. I like to think I'm one of the best painters, period." So this quote and the one that Becca shared earlier really articulate the challenge that women faced to not have their status as artists inflected by their gender as women. Even today, I'm like a little loath to admit, the title of this show, Modern Women, calls out their gender in a way that I actually suspect both artists would have bristled at. Sorry. And Stieglitz and his circle really promoted O'Keeffe as an authoritative female artistic voice, and they insisted that her flower paintings were a distinctly feminine expression of emotion and of female sexuality. Whereas O'Keeffe's intention was really to convey nothing more than her profound human experience of the flower, which she achieved through scale, color, and cropping. So if we look at the image on the left, it's called Iris. We can clearly see it's an orchid, but that was the title that O'Keeffe gave it. And this work isn't as abstracted as some of her other flower paintings, but nevertheless, she focuses our attention by removing all context from the still life and also using extreme cropping and sensitivity to color to really make us pay attention to the details. Indeed, it may have been Stieglitz and his circle's interpretation of her flower paintings and other work that may have been a catalyst for her to explore other subject matter that was less stereotypically gendered. And also her career-long reticence for her work not to be shown in exhibitions. Excuse me. O'Keeffe did not want her work shown in exhibitions that focused specifically on female artists. So again, sorry, Georgia. Excuse me. If we turn to the works on the right, these are two drawings from Kay Sage's series, The Minutes, which was produced by 1937 and 1943, and catalogs a journey of an egg through surrealist landscapes in 24 drawings to echo the 24 hours of the day. And perhaps it was partly due to her own aesthetic sensibilities, but Sage actually intentionally represented her work as agendered, and really from the outset, she shied away from motifs that could be characterized as feminine. And when she was first starting out, she signed her works just with the initial K, in part to let her work speak for itself without the valence of her gender. And indeed, this worked because when her future husband, Yves Tanguy, first encountered her work, he thought it was done by a man due to what he interpreted as a real masculine aesthetic. So for both artists, their gender was something that they had to work around and compensate for in a male-dominated field and frankly in a male-dominated world. But their experience as women is also really fundamental in contributing to their unique perspective and their groundbreaking aesthetics. If you are interested in seeing the show, but you're not able to get to Waterbury, Connecticut, we do have a 3D navigable tour, so you can visit the exhibition virtually. Molly is going to drop that link into the chat, and also you can navigate to the Mattituck Museum's website and find the link to 3D tours in the drop-down menu. In closing, these conversations among O'Keeffe and the works in our collection have been incredibly invigorating and have offered opportunities to look at the work of O'Keeffe and our own collection in a new light. Through the spotlight conversations to the larger exhibition, we've been able to tell new stories and reach broader audiences. We are so grateful to the Cleveland Museum of Art and to Art Bridges for the loan, and also to Thomaston Savings Bank for supporting Modern Women. We'd also like to thank our board of directors, and a real special thanks to the staff at the Mattituck Museum, without whom none of this work would be possible. So we're so very grateful to them. And I'd also like to thank Molly for inviting us to this talk and to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum for all of the work you do. And finally, to everyone here for joining us for this program. We're so grateful you're here. We're grateful we're here too. And we would just like to say thanks for being here. And without further ado, we'd like to say thank you and open things up for questions.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you so much to the three of you. What a fascinating dive into what you've been working on at the Mattituck. I just want to express my appreciation as someone who works for the O'Keeffe Museum, but I think also on behalf of folks who are just deeply interested in O'Keeffe, why it is so valuable to place O'Keeffe's work in dialogue with other pieces and other artists, and to expand our perception of themes that overlap between her and many other people of her time, especially other women artists. It's such an inspirational thing to be able to, widen our lens in that way. So thank you again for bringing us on a journey into these two great projects. So for now, let us turn to some questions. I will quickly let folks know I did drop that link in the chat. We will send a follow-up email as well, which I'll include that link as part of that email, so you can visit that exhibition virtually. First, let's turn to Jamie, who I believe is a colleague of yours at the Mattituck. She wants to know, what is something you learned about O'Keeffe and Sage that you wish more people knew about? Signed, Jamie, who is so impressed with the exhibit and the curatorial team.
Jamie is such a wonderful cheerleader and a great colleague. Thanks, Jamie. I mean, there's so many things, but really, I think the most fundamental thing is is the way that both Sage and O'Keeffe used their artwork to communicate deeper truths about themselves in the world, particularly as women working in the early to mid 20th century. There were just fewer outlets for expression, and they were both so creative in terms of developing an aesthetic means to convey their experience. Becca, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was also just going to add about Sage specifically, that she was happy. She had so many moments of happiness in her life. As Kefi mentioned, Sage committed suicide, and a lot of her artwork, as everyone saw today, is quite desolate, sort of quite despairing, and she is known for these really sort of sad and heavy and dislocated scenes. But that she was someone who, had friends. She sent Christmas cards, she made jokes. We have so much of her material in ephemera that speaks to a woman who had such a full life experience beyond just her mental health struggles. And so that was one of the things that I learned, and like I think that we as a team really worked to convey through the use of archives.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Another question we have from Linda. Um, she is wondering, so that the Kay Sage's work was primarily interpreted through a biographical lens, and she wonders if Sage would have invited this interpretation, or if there are other ways that we could interpret her work outside of her biography.
That's a great question. And I mean, the answer is absolutely. She was living in Europe in the aftermath of during and in the aftermath of World War I, and also in the lead up to World War II. So she was very deeply affected by what was happening politically in her region and globally. She was also deeply affected by what was happening, art historically. So she was living in Italy. For those who know art history, you might notice the influence of De Chirico in her work. So there are lots of different ways in which one can interpret anyone's artwork. And in this instance, the biography felt like kind of the most compelling connection. But of course, there are all sorts of different ways that we can look at the work of these artists.
Great, thank you so much. Another question, well, here's just a remark I'll share from Janice. What an interesting comparison between O'Keeffe and Sage. And she thanks you for sharing about that exhibition. But she's also wondering, you had mentioned that you hadn't found any evidence that they'd met, but do you know of any evidence perhaps where they were just aware of what each other's work was like or what they were doing?
So they were both living in New York, in the there was like a year where they were both living in New York in 1939, 1940. So there is a possibility that they're female artists working in New York at the same time, and so there's quite a possibility that they were certainly aware of each other, even if they weren't necessarily operating in exactly the same circles. And I have found one evidence for one time when their work was shown in the same exhibition, and that was at a gallery in Florida in the 1940s. And it was a kind of modernist exhibition. There were a number of different artists represented, but that's the only evidence that I've been able to find for their work being shown in the same space. And it certainly wasn't the same sort of close comparison as the one that we have now.
Thank you so much. I'd like to also just point out we're in March. March is Women's History Month, and we're joined by a group of women from a curatorial team in Mattituck talking about O'Keeffe, Kay Sage, but also many of the artists that you mentioned as a part of the conversation series are also women artists. So I'm wondering if any of the three of you would just like to speak a little bit more about how projects like this increase visibility for women artists and what you hope to see changing over time in museums overall, what kind of things we could be thinking about in this regard.
I'm happy to jump in, but if Becca or Julie would like to say something, I'd like to give them an opportunity.
I was going to say specifically for Sage, she is someone who has for so long been exhibited when she does get exhibitions, specifically in conversation with her husband. And it was a very distinct curatorial choice to discuss the fact that she was, married to one of the most famous surrealist paintings of the time, but to allow her work to speak not necessarily as the wife of a surrealist painter or as like the artistic companion of a surrealist painter, but sort of as the work in and of itself, and instead allowing her to be compared to another female painter, which I think shows a really sort of gorgeous deviation from the way that her work up until this point has been really seen as a comparison point to her better known half. Um, I think that's like a trend that I would love to see as well. And then I will also say, in looking at a lot of the conversation pieces that we pulled, like I was pulling from Catlit, as well as like Elizabeth Kirk and Jane Peterson. These are women who were engaging with really sort of barrier pushing and boundary defying movements, but aren't part of the canon sort of those movements in and of themselves. And so I think having these conversations and forefronting them in museums alongside the works of Georgia O'Keeffe allows us to really uplift female artists who otherwise wouldn't necessarily be considered sort of in survey courses of whatever movements they were participating in.
I guess I'll speak a little bit about the O'Keeffe and Conversation #3 coming this summer in June, and it's titled Women in Abstraction. I think for me, it was really important for me to focus on kind of this underrepresented narrative in the field of abstraction and focus in on these women that were telling their stories through this medium. And I found it really interesting to find even artists that were based in Connecticut in our collection and from the greater New England region, and kind of showcase their voices alongside Georgia O'Keeffe, who has like this national recognition as with her medium and artwork.
Great, thank you so much. We're rounding up very close to 10, so I'm going to ask one final question to the three of you. When people visit either the conversation pop-ups or the K-Sage and O'Keeffe exhibition, perhaps virtually, which is another thing that we can be grateful for in this tech savvy age, what would you hope that someone would walk away from those experiences, having learned or thinking or feeling? What's something you hope people will come away with?
That's such a hard question. Um, But just in general, we're hoping that people, come for O'Keeffe. Everyone loves O'Keeffe, but that they'll leave with a deeper appreciation for these other artists who might not necessarily be as well known. And even just in the initial feedback that we have gotten from these two initiatives, that definitely seems to be happening. So it's really great. Thank you, Georgia, for your star power, because it's been great for the Mattituck Museum and also for these lesser known artists.
And I just like to add, I also hope that they can come away understanding artists as people who, work meticulously at their craft and are constantly changing and constantly evolving, rather than artists who sort of emerged fully formed with their most sort of iconic aesthetics and particular styles that we might associate them with today. I think one of the beautiful parts of Modern Women is it shows these two artists in development and sort of working and changing and evolving. And I think that that's something that I hope people can see.
Great. I know that's a tough question, but what wonderful answers. And so I hope that those of you who are with us today, if you don't get to visit the museum in person, that you will enjoy this virtual exploration of the K-Sage and O'Keeffe exhibition. And I do tend to like to wrap up these conversations with a comment from the chat. I'll share what Heather had to say, which is just to say, very nicely done. Congratulations to all of you on your work, your passion, your vision, and your insights, which I think really is a perfect way to explain what you're able to do today. And thank you so much for taking us on this journey into these projects. I've learned so much and I'm inspired. Is there anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up today?
Just again, like to thank you, Molly, for the invitation and for the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum for all the work you do. And then again, for art enthusiasts and people who are interested in this work, because it's what really, it makes it worth it for us. So thank you.
Okay, absolutely. And thank you for being here. And thank you again for your time. Thank you to our audience. Please be on the lookout for that follow-up email from me. I'll include more in ways that you can connect with the Mattituck and to see that exhibition. But otherwise, we are at 10 o'clock. So I will say goodbye and thank you again to our guests today. And we hope to see you at the next Mornings with O'Keeffe. Okay. Thanks so much.